Alright, hello everybody, and welcome back to my suggested balance changes. We have exactly 46 neutral cards remaining, as well as Morvaran and Ozan, as well as Vanescula, which we will be doing today. I think all of those will take one video each, so not including this video, 3 remaining to do, and then we will be finished. Worthy opponent, though. Certainly one of Vanescula's stronger cards. Running 2 copies of these in your deck is a bit like having the 3rd and 4th KGP agent, and if you run Kaizaj as well, that's 5 cards you can open with in Chapter 1, Slot 1. And people are very happy to do that. People are super happy to play Worthy Opponent at the very beginning of the game. There's a number of 10 health creatures that it's completely okay to do that with, such as Ogre Warlord. That thing only has 6 attack, and it gives you a 5 armor reward, effectively. And even in aggro decks, this is really good. Cards like Ogre Chieftain are really strong, and even Ogre Chieftain is good in those sort of mid-rangey, building AP, control-y, sort of that side of the spectrum decks too, because killing that is going to leave you with 2 gold, and you'll be on exactly 15 life. That's exactly the conditions for full Darok, right? At least the current version. And even if you don't open with it, it's obviously good later on in the game, where it gets less punishing. I think just comparing this to some of the other class-specific basic game, like, let's think of Raptor and his Berserker Shield. You have to have 10 armor. And in the right deck, that's not too hard, but you can't open with it because it costs 2 gold, and obviously you don't start with 10 armor. But this, it doesn't cost anything, and the thing you're spending is your health, which you start with 30 of. So it comes down to that again, like, you start with the resources that you can spend to make this work, which is why people want to open with it, and which is why it's a valuable card. But it's not that it's just a good card. Even if this was neutral and available to every class, I think Vanescula would find it better, and it would be more useful in her decks, because she is a class that benefits from being on 3 base attack. She has access to more creatures that become really efficient when you're on 3 base attack, such as Werewolf Rebel, obviously Troll Chucker, everyone has that. But stuff like Haunted Leech as well, once you're on 3 base, that thing becomes significantly more efficient. Alpha Werewolf as well, if you're on 3 base, you can 2-hit kill that. Vanescula just has a lot of very good cards for that 3 base attack style aggro deck. And you could even argue that that deck's more of a 5 base attack style aggro deck, because once you get there, you can start 2-hit killing the 10 health creatures. 1-hit killing Alpha Werewolf and Haunted Leech becomes really good. Certainly somewhere between 3 and 5 base attack. It's an aggro deck, but it's slightly more mid-range than other aggro decks. But Vanescula can run the best deck like that in the game because she has the best tools for getting that base attack, but also the most cards that benefit from being at that base attack. So I think you could easily make Worthy Opponent cost 1, but I haven't done that though, because I feel like it's part of her identity. It feels like, well, she's a vampire. Vampires are supernaturally strong, certainly stronger than humans, and it makes sense for her to have these powerful, sort of vampire-ly bodily functions that, in my opinion, shouldn't cost anything because they're part of her. She's a vampire and, you know, she's able to do that kind of stuff. Maybe not so much hunger. Maybe that's something that a vampire experiences. But I feel like a hungry vampire... Jagex nailed it. Remove 5 health. Being hungry is not a pleasant experience, but if you were a vampire, surely it would make you more alert, more savage, more aggressive. You know, you're looking for food, and vampires go a bit crazy when that happens, right? At least in all of the vampire films I've consumed. I actually find vampires incredibly interesting. Anyway, a common theme that you will see in my changes is that all of her sort of bodily functions, like sap life force, crypt, which is her coffin, culling the weak, you know, stuff that vampires do, that vampires are, just that. I think all of that stuff shouldn't cost anything. Also, from RuneScape lore, Vanescula is this vampire princess that has access to just enormous amounts of wealth. So there's another level of, I don't think things should cost gold for this legend sort of information. The single-player Trials of Radamus campaign, like, completely nails it. Vanescula is this really strong vampire. She starts with 5 base attack or something like that in the campaign. And I feel like playing Vanescula should be this experience of having these really powerful cards, like these vampire things that she can do, being able to grow her base attack quickly. I think that's Vanescula's identity. So that's why I didn't make Worthy Opponent cost 1. I think it's her flavor. But also, if Hunger were to cost 0, then nobody would run a 1-cost Worthy Opponent. Whereas if they both cost 0, I think there is some choice. So, remove 5 max health. What that does is still damage you in exactly the same way as Hunger does, but now your maximum health is 25. So this card is not particularly appealing to decks that perhaps want to go all the way to the final fight, or might go all the way to the final fight. Worthy Opponent is much better there. But for an aggro deck, you don't really care about the final fight too much. So remove 5 max life is effectively the same as removing 5 normal life. But with my Nastroth now costing 3, I think Hunger can get cheaper as well. And yes, it's got enormously cheaper, but I've always thought Hunger was overcosted anyway. I've always felt like it's, you know, a bit damaging for its cost. At any rate, I really like the idea of these powerful vampire-y things just being free because, oh, she's a vampire, she's really strong. But that's not to say Worthy Opponent wouldn't be included in those sort of 3 to 5 base attack aggro decks we were speaking about. I'm not necessarily sure Hunger's even that good, because one, I don't know if you need all of this base attack. Once you get up to the base attack that is required, any more base attack on top of that just feels like a dead draw, especially if it's KGP Agent, which will discard your sort of cards, or Hunger, which is going to damage you. So maybe you don't include all of them anyway. But also Worthy Opponent has a lot of synergy for bringing your health down to about 15. You can get Mortal pretty much right away with this card, and with the changes to Heme Alchemist that I'd like to put through, I'm going to put this card over here, because I'd also like to talk about Werewolf Rebel at the same time. Firstly, I think this card's always been really powerful, just like Haunted Soul level good. Well, Old Haunted Soul. For those that don't know, Old Haunted Soul used to give you a 2 gold reward. And I think this card is just, like, it represents a power level just a bit too high in that sort of 3 to 5 base attack aggro deck that we've been talking about. I think this is one of the better cards in there. 4 damage is exactly what you want. That's Troll Chucker level good. And then this gold makes those really powerful sort of supports she has access to. Gorge, Firewatch. Some people are even running Doric. Well, Darox as well. That costs gold. And this is certainly a facilitator there. But also Death Lotus Assassin. Just some access to those powerful supports that deal damage. I think she should have to work a bit harder for her gold. But also, with a whole bunch of her cards getting cheaper, such as Hunger, and a few others, I've mentioned some of the other bodily functions, I think they should all cost 0 as well. And there are some changes to their effects to accommodate that. But she doesn't need all this gold for those decks. And let's be real, she was never spending that gold on those cards anyway. This is far too strong. But I have thought of the clause, so let's say remove 2 health, that happens first, and then you deal 4 damage to your rival. That happens after you've lost 2 health, because the text always resolves in order, and then you could have one final clause that says, Mortal, gain 2 gold, similar to the text here. So the interesting thing is that the remove 2 health clause would help you reach Mortal, in a way, if you weren't there, which I think is interesting. But I chose not to put it on the card, but I am putting the idea out there. If we're not just going to take it off entirely, which I would like to do, then you could put it harder to get on the card. Make people work for that gold a bit more, like make it a mortal clause. Or maybe you could split it, I don't know, 1 gold reward, 1 mortal. Maybe that would be the best thing to do. Maybe put this, because if you take all the gold off, then it's obviously worse than Troll Chucker, because it says remove 2 health. But if you leave 1 on there, it's sort of the same power level, the same card as Troll Chucker. And if you have that extra 1 gold mortal clause, then, well, it's a class card. I guess it has a license to be slightly better. But I think the point I'm trying to highlight is this is too strong. Whether you agree or disagree with me, I would ask you to hold on a moment, and before you leave a comment, see the rest of the changes, because I think certainly this change to Heme Alchemist, but also a bunch of the other cards in here, will compensate for Werewolf Rebel not being as good. So I think overall the power of Vanescula will remain the same, and I just want to point out that she's one of the top tier decks currently. Somebody on ladder finished top 10, I believe it was Pharmacon? Or Enigma Requiem. Somebody finished very highly with sort of that 3 to 5 base attack suicide Vanescula. Also, taking the gold off Werewolf Rebel, I think, is fine because I'm sort of adding it back in Heme Alchemist, which is probably going to be quite a strong card. It is a ruby, so maybe it could be Mortal gain 4 gold, but then maybe it might be a bit too strong. I haven't play tested it, but it is a ruby. It has a license to be a powerful card, one that people want to craft. I'm completely okay with that. But all gold things aside, a completely separate discussion is why I don't like this card. We'll talk about that now and return to everything else in just a bit. I've always found the effect quite silly. Even from the very beginning of the game, the phrase meme deck sort of occurred. I mentioned in a previous video that Keris deck that found itself on Reddit, the Kalman deck it was called. There are cards with just weird gimmicks on them, like Heme Alchemist. Maybe I don't like it just because it facilitates a cheese. If not anything else, it's very all-in. 10 gold is an enormous amount to sort of find, to then just chuck away on rolling the dice, basically. I mean, you could spend that on Vampire Power. And the deck that Heme Alchemist goes into, you do run Vampire Power as well, because it's an alternative way to win the game. Certainly this is very amusing when it happens, and maybe it should exist in the game simply because of that. I have no problems with Heme Alchemist existing if it's, like, not a top-tier card, similar to how I was talking about Linza in the Linza video. But I do want to take a moment to ask, what is the game trying to be? This memey, funny game, or does it want to be, like, a serious card game? I think going into the future, with the current attitude of the majority of the player base, this would be the better card to put in the game. But I have no problems with this existing. It's not exactly that good. Maybe this could be put in... Maybe they could be both put in the game, but this would be a different card with a different art and a different name. The reason I thought the effect would be appropriate for Heme Alchemist is because Heme Alchemy is blood alchemy, turning blood into gold. And there aren't any cards in the game yet that are dedicated gold gain when you're at mortal. Now, it could be mortal gain 5 gold. I'd have no problems with that. Obviously, you wouldn't have the 2 gold reward, but I wanted to have, you know, kind of split it up, because this is Black Arm Bandit level when you're not mortal. And sometimes you might find yourself in a really bad spot where you're willing to play the Heme Alchemist for only 2 gold. Obviously, the majority of the card is being mortal, that's what it's about, but it just didn't sit with me the right way, being so dependent on mortal. There'll be some matchups where going mortal will be really dangerous, and you don't want to do that. With regards to Worthy Opponent and Hunger, though, I don't know if everyone would want to run all of them, as well as KGP Agent and Kaizaj. I don't know if you'd need all of that base attack. Certainly KGP Agent and Hunger are the better ones to open up with, since they're unconditional and not as punishing. And Worthy Opponent would be less good to open up with because it is more conditional and you're going to take more damage. But it does put you in Mortal, which, with the discussion we just had about Heme Alchemist and potentially Werewolf Rebel, would be better for the aggro decks. But also, where the opponent just gets better the later the game goes. Once you've already built some base attack, this card just gets stronger and stronger, and obviously you can combo it with a weapon. Not any other reach tools, because Toxil, where the opponent into a 10 health creature doesn't work, because the 10 health creature has 6 health. But yeah, I think where the opponent has some synergy with going down to Mortal for stuff like Daruk, Satifi, Heme Alchemist, Werewolf Rebel, if it were to have that clause. As well as, obviously, all of the other Mortal cards that are quite good in Vanescula. But, moving on. Next up, we do have Afflicted. A fine card. I was very happy with the change that they originally put through. I didn't like how it used to give you health equal to your rival's next creature ×2. I thought that was just ridiculous. It made it feel very random, because, alright, there is some level of prediction in trying to, you know, you might know what they're going to, or have a good idea of the kind of creature they might play in which slot, and there are, you know, things that point towards that, but you don't always get it right. And it felt like, well, I'm going to double a KGP agent's attack and just heal for 2 life, or I'm going to double off Jad and heal for 30. Or even Daganov Sentinel, which is 16 life. Which it just felt really random. The ×2 multiplier kind of doubled the randomness, if you will, and now it only has a ×1 multiplier, so to speak. So the randomness isn't as amplified, if that makes any sense. And you get that guaranteed 3 life as well. I don't think this is Amscat Mystic level, power level, but it's still a reasonable card. And let's be honest, Old Afflicted was busted. That thing was way too good. It just felt like such horseshit when you were playing any other aggro deck against Vanescula with that kind of Afflicted. I know it sounds silly, but I was running an aggro Raptor. Well, aggro sustain Raptor. It was like all of the aggro cards that are available. Scorpion, Troll Chucker, Goblin Brute. But also all of the heal cards available to him, which at the time was Daganov Fledgling, which for those that don't know used to heal 6 life. Rock Crab, Armored Zombie, Anticipation. And the idea was to do damage and heal at the same time, and there was a little bit of base attack in there in the form of, obviously, KGP agents and Steel Titan. But the idea was it was like, Vanescula was so popular. The reason I built the deck and started playing it was because I wanted to hard counter all of the aggro 3 AP to 5 AP Vanesculas, and it was pretty good against those decks until they played Afflicted, and it just felt like they were cheating, because they would just get so much health off all of the cards in your deck, like Ice Nile, Troll Chucker, Krasian Warrior, Void Brawler. That was a pretty good combo with all of the heals. It just felt like my Rock Crab cannot keep up with your Afflicted. This is just... The Old Afflicted was way too good. Alpha Werewolf, a fine card. I don't think it needs changing. You could make it a 7 attack creature so that you can't open with it and then be exactly mortal and deal 8 damage. If it had 7 attack, you'd end up with 16 life, and that would not be mortal. But I kind of liked that about it. I wanted to keep it, but you could change it. The only time I ever really thought this was a problem was when I'm playing a deck that, you know, well, when Vanescula just doesn't have to worry about being mortal at all. She knows, oh, I'm playing against Raptor. Raptor's not going to do any damage to me. At least the current metagame Raptor. So she can tank this, Chapter 1, Slot 1, deal 8 damage, and that's like 2 cards worth of efficiency in a single slot, and it's just nuts, because sometimes Raptor will take a bit of damage trying to get off his feet, and then just this combined with that, you end up dying. But then maybe that's Raptor's fault for running a deck where Vanescula doesn't have to worry about being mortal. That's the beauty of self-correcting metagames. So for that reason, I think Alpha Werewolf's fine. I really like the fact that you can go mortal with it. Something interesting, though, related to Alpha Werewolf is Jared. Now, for those that don't know, this guy is the main antagonist in the novel Betrayal at Falador, which is a RuneScape novel published a long time ago. And he in RuneScape disguises himself as like a traveler in Canifis, but actually he is a werewolf and can transform into a werewolf at any time and preys on unsuspecting people who are... Yeah, he's a nasty piece of work. But the interesting thing is, this card right here, Alpha Werewolf, the art that this is based on is actually Jared's concept art. So, yeah, this image here is actually Jared. So I feel like Jared has a connection to the Alpha Werewolf in a way. So adding an Alpha Werewolf to your hand feels quite natural, and it gives the card a leg up, because this is quite a bad card. Definitely not very good at all. Doesn't see any play currently, and definitely could see some love. I see the design behind it. I get why it's bad, because it goes in that deck that runs Scorpion, Troll Chucker, Werewolf Rebel, Haunted Leech, Flying Leech, Zombie Pirate, Ring of Recoil, Undead Cow, and then the only card left, providing I haven't forgotten any, would be Jared, right? The deck, the Face Hunter style, I'm gonna spank you in the face, and I have absolutely no regard to my own life total. It goes in that deck, and obviously they're a bit conservative. They don't want to print too many more aggro tools, and making it, like, clearly a bad card with horrible stats for the aggro. Like, no one wants to kill a 2/6 and then get the effect deal 4 damage to both legends. That's so much damage you're gonna take just to deal 4 damage to them. But, like, it has that stat line because it's like the only deck it would go in is the Face Hunter deck. So that's them being conservative. It makes sense. But like in the Chronicle we know and love, that deck's not even that good. In fact, it's quite a bad deck because she has far better options. We were mentioning earlier that 3 to 5 base attack style aggro deck, which can deal, you know, so much damage. Already has like a number of really efficient cards to kill when you're at that base attack, and then it's just better to include Ogre Chieftain or even Yoga Shaman over this guy. I mean, in Chronicle, if you had to run a 50-card deck, then Jared might see play in it, but obviously we only have 30-card decks, and when you have small decks, you just run the 30 best cards. And that's why you run the minimum deck size, because surely you have the 30 best cards that synergize the best already, and adding any more just dilutes that. So Jared's quite a way off being playable. I think he does need a bit of help. And as I mentioned earlier, that connection with the Alpha Werewolf's art, and Jared is pretty much a big, bad, scary werewolf. But yeah, card draw, and at that high-quality card draw for the aggro deck, add Alpha Werewolf to your hand. Firewatch, though. Still the same, I didn't do anything to it, but I would like to point out that I wasn't a huge fan of the most recent change to this card. For those that don't know, it used to steal up to 5 health from Rival, and was changed to 4 like we see here, and one of the most recent changes actually. Certainly the card was strong, and I think something needed to be done, but I felt like the thing that ought to have been done is sort of cut the gold available to Vanescula, or make it harder for her to get that gold. Because overall, in the most highly optimized decks, Firewatch was actually a run 1 of, and the deck had the gold for 2, but you didn't run 2, because the only time you'd ever actually play 2 is, well, if you make it basically all the way to the end of the game, like chapter 4 or 5, and that's when you've played enough creatures to collect enough gold to have enough gold to pay for both the Firewatches. But obviously, if you're an aggro deck, you don't really want to be going to chapter 4 or 5, you want to finish the game before then. So you'd only run 1 because you'd only really ever pay for 1, but you'd still keep enough gold as if there were 2 in the deck. And that's because you need to find the gold quickly to be able to pay for the Firewatch. If you only had enough gold in your deck for 1 Firewatch, then you might not find all of that gold enough because, you know, the time that gold would start coming together for you to be able to play the card would be towards the end of the game. And obviously you want to get this strong, powerful effect out earlier than that. Like, you don't want it sitting around in your hand being a dead draw. So that's the thinking behind only running 1, whilst still maintaining the sort of gold for both. At the lower ranks, I'm not sure how good this was. Maybe quite good, which is probably why they changed it. So I'll trust Jagix's judgment there, because I don't have access to the stats, but I thought it was okay at 5 health, personally. Vampire Trader. I think some people will be surprised that there is no change, because this is clearly one of the worst cards in the game. I mean, the only redeeming thing I can say about it is that maybe you'd use it like Safe Spot, that 5/1 weapon, similar to dealing 5 damage to your next creature, and then you could, like, kill a Jad, and that's, like, a reasonable way to open the game, I suppose. But, like, any deck that wants to build base attack, like, Vanescula has far more efficient ways of doing that do not involve running Vampire Trader. And in an aggro deck, this is no good either. Like, it would be alright, but 7 health, man, that's... I don't know, there's much better aggro decks, right? But the reason I didn't change it was because I think the role this card has in Chronicle... Alright, so it's not any rarity. You get this as soon as you start the game. So it doesn't really have much of a license to be a good card because, you know, you don't have to pay for it at all. That's just how card games are. But also it's one of those learning curve cards. New players will look at Vanescula and go, huh, what does mortal mean? They'll hover over the card and go, oh, 15 life? Oh, these effects are so powerful. And then they'll want to build a deck with lots of mortal effects in there, and they'll think to themselves, how do I get mortal to make all of these effects work? Ah, I see Vampire Trader and Rush of Strength, right? So what they're supposed to be is utility. Health removal utility, if that's a utility. But obviously when you get better at the game, you realize that these kind of suck, and there are much better ways to get your life down, such as not getting your life down and letting your opponent do it. But if you're going to manually get rid of your own life, then Worthy Opponent is a good way to open the game to get mortal. Alpha Werewolf is a pretty good way to get mortal. Even if you don't open with it on Chapter 1, you can use it to knock off 8 life. Ogre Chieftain, you can tank some hits off that guy. Alright, there's just much better ways to remove your health, but I do think this has a place in the game for new players that are learning, so I haven't changed it. I don't know. A token buff to keep the masses happy might be just right, draw a card on it. I mean, they're a trader, sort of buying cards, I don't know. Vampire Power, a fine card. We know it's really good because of Dungeoneering, and I think if all of my other changes were to be implemented, which they won't be, but if we consider this a patch, then in this patch, Vampire Power would be much better, because I just think gold generally will get better. Vampire Juvenate. Not a particularly good card. Add 1 health to your rival's next creature. Certainly better than Raptor's Zombie Monkey, which adds 2 attack to your rival's next creature. And that's reflected in the stat line, right? This has 1 extra attack compared to the Zombie Monkey for an effect that is slightly better, I would argue. But still not a very slot-efficient card, and that's the same story for a bunch of the creatures that have very low stat lines. It's just the way Chronicle is. But a fair card, a balanced card. Treus Death. So I took the 3 armor off it. Not much of a change, but this is making more of a statement than anything else. I don't think base attack removal should be super strong. Well, I can't do anything about it. It already is super strong, right? The effect remove 1 base attack from rival is very sought after and has caused a bunch of problems in Chronicle's existence. Like, take a look at the original Ogre Brute, which was a 2/5 creature that said, remove 1 base attack from rival and you take 6 damage. And people would just play that Chapter 1, Slot 1. It was nerfed. That thing was insane. Dust Devil, that was nerfed. Hope Devourer, that was nerfed. Karam wasn't nerfed, but they did sort of restrict Linza's gold gain a bit and make some of the cards she enjoyed a bit more expensive. Base attack removal has always been a big issue. And it's always been very, very powerful. The effect can end up doing a lot of damage to your rival on the chapter that the base attack is removed, since they might end up fighting a whole bunch of creatures with less base attack than they were expecting. It also makes it harder for them to curve upwards for the rest of the game, and when there are only 2 KGP agents that you can run, getting off your feet can be an issue if you get Treus Death before you actually get off your feet. And then if you don't curve upwards properly for the rest of the game, then your opponent just gets ahead of you more quickly. And also this has an impact in the final fight as well, because they'll deal less damage to you. The effect overall just has lots of very powerful things going on for it, and I don't like the idea of cards that have this effect being like super powerful cards, and I think Treus Death is quite good. I think removing the 3 armor isn't going to make a huge amount of difference, but it will do in things like Dungeoneering, and you get 30 random cards / 60, and then you have to build a deck of 30 out of them. Like, that 3 armor can mean quite a bit in those formats. I just want the card to be a bit worse. I don't like this effect being super powerful, and some people might point out, that doesn't fit with what you said in the previous video, where you mentioned interaction cards should be really strong in Chronicle. Now, my rebuttal to that is, I don't think Treus Death is an interaction card. Certainly it does something to your rival, but that's not the same as interaction. In my mind, interaction is a card that, your opponent has to have something, you have to meet a condition, right? Your rival has 10 armor, and if they have that, you then get a benefit. Or if they have, 8 gold, you heal 10 life, or if they have more base attack than you get rewarded a base attack. Stuff like that is interaction. This is an effect that always happens. And at that, a very powerful effect. Terror Dog. So I changed it to be a bit more in line with current Dagannoth Fledgling, which is a 4-2 creature, so I changed the stats of this to 4-2. And Fledgling gives you 2 temporary attack, this gives you 1, so I increased that up to 2. And then it kept the same mortal effect, which effectively now doubles the effectiveness of the card. The problem with this Terror Dog is it's a 4-3, so it's hard to open the game with. In fact, it's impossible to open the game with, because 1 temporary attack is not useful at the beginning of the game. It's just not enough to do anything meaningful. And 4 temporary attack's quite good. It's like Kanum level good. Which is weird, because Kanum only has 1 extra health and you always get the temporary attack. Anyway, even if gain 1 temporary attack was good, which it's not, then this is hard to open the game with because you'll always take a hit off it. It's got 3 health. And if you have 3 base attack, then, well, why are you killing Terror Dog? You've already curved up adequately enough. I don't know. I feel like this card is, you know, a 2 health card. Now, the difference between it and Dagannoth Fledgling is that this comes with a mortal effect, which I would argue this effect is better than the 1 life reward that Fledgling comes with, but that's okay. They're both Sapphire cards. This has no rarity here, but that's, well, it's a Sapphire. It just got removed. That's a mistake. I didn't actually mean to change the rarity of any of the cards, if anyone has noticed that. Like, quite a number of the cards have lost their rarity, or changed rarity. That's just mistakes during the making of the cards. The only card I think that should be changed in rarity is Kriara, but that's different, because I create like a whole different effect. Like, I changed that card a lot. Anyway, gain 4 temporary attack is better than the 1 life reward, but that's okay. It's a class card, it has a license to be better. Either way, it's not like Dagannoth Fledgling saw much play anyway, and I don't think Terror Dog would make the constructed cut either. It's more of a Dungeoneering change or other draft format change. Shadowstalk. I mentioned this in a previous video. All of the gold-based strikes, I think, just could have 1 gold knocked off. Sap Life Force. As I mentioned earlier, vampire, bodily function. Like, who are you paying this gold to? Doesn't make sense. You're a vampire. This is a thing vampires can do. But like, the effect's not even that good. It doesn't need to cost a gold. Things that need to cost a gold are the ones that you open with at the very beginning of the game that would be a bit too OP. You put a 1 gold cost on them to stop you from doing it Chapter 1, Slot 1. I don't think Sap Life Force needs that. In fact, it could cost 0 and you could give it a 1 life reward, which is exactly what I did. And now this is like a 3 life heal, because you get that 1 life and 2 health here, but also it's a bit of reach. Again, more of a Dungeoneering change, probably won't see play in Constructed. Thought it could do with a bit of love. Sapphire Hollow. Nobody wants to pay 2 gold to draw 1 of anything, especially a vampire. They're all useless. This is a whole slot, a whole card, and 2 gold that you got from some other card just to replace itself as a vampire. This is possibly the worst card in the game. There's quite a lot of very bad reach cards, right? But at least they are useful in the sense that they're reach. This is consuming your resources and slots to do effectively nothing. Nothing worthwhile, anyway. And okay, I get it. You need to be very conservative when it comes to targeted draw. I think if we were living the dream, Ranis Draken would be one of these really sought-after vampires, and that drawing him out of your deck, that would be a bit strong. And my personal opinion is that Ranis Draken is currently quite good. We'll talk about that later. That might be a surprising opinion. But it's not worth drawing out of your deck. But you do have to be careful. In the future, if you are absolutely certain that new vampires would be printed, then yes, you have to be careful right now with cards that target draw. If you're not so certain, then maybe you don't have to worry so much. I mean, vampires are quite bad. Anyway, vampires are quite bad, so if you're going to add them to your hand, you're going to need a big selection. That is so that you find at least a few, at least a couple that are sort of reasonable. I don't think this is going to see constructed play, at least until they print like some synergies, like a deck like Calphite Morvaran that instead of Calphites uses vampires and is Vanescula specific. Until then, I can't see Sapphire Hollow being that good. But at least for now, it avoids the problem that this card sort of could possibly come with, which is you can't draw any specific vampire if you're getting random ones, and that was the fear that this card came with, I suppose. I think this is the way it needs to be. You do need a big selection to find a couple that are useful, but also Burnt Meat exists, which draws 4 cards that you actually put in your deck, and that for the same cost. But I guess it's kind of like card draw, and in Dungeoneering that, could be valuable, because there's a couple of vampire synergies in Vanescula, not as many as I think there should be, but Harold is a card, not that it's very good right now, but I have made a change to it that makes it more palatable. And Harold's pretty good when you combine it with something like Tenebra. Anyway, this is an awful card. This is still not that good, but it's better than it was before, brings it more in line with stuff like Kalfa Egg Chamber, the Adventurous, etc. And I think it's flavorful. For those that don't know, Saffron Hollow's like a vampire hunter, so if you pay him for his services, it would make sense to be able to find lots of vampires in future chapters. Rush of Strength. We've had this discussion when we talked about Vampire Trader. I don't have much to add. Ripper Demon. This card to me has always felt like a Revenant Knight that doesn't come with 3 temporary attack. Like, imagine just a 10-10 Rev Knight that says Strike Rival, and that's it. Alright, this comes with Mortal Strike. You have to be mortal to not be exhausted in the same way the Revenant Knight would be. But for the most part, it's going to be exactly the same card used in basically the same way. And that's going to be in tandem with Tormented Demon, or something like that. Currently, a big part of Darkstrike Ariane is, once you get to about 5 base attack, you 2-hit kill a Tormented Demon, so you'll take 4 damage fighting it, and you'll take another 4 damage due to the effect, which, if we're using Ripper Demon, then that's 8 damage, that's going to help you get down to Mortal. And then you go into the Rev Knight, or I guess Ripper Demon, with your 4-2 weapon, and then you 1-hit kill it. And you also have the second charge of the weapon for 4 extra damage behind the strike. And then if it's Rev Knight, you get that 3 temporary attack, which you then carry into the next demon, which will help you kill that demon. And that's a big way how Ariane kind of can chain out the strikes. Not only does she not get exhausted, but also has a little bit of extra help killing the demons. It's not just the damage behind the strike that is nice that the temporary attack offers, but it is the reach for the next demon. Now, Ripper Demon doesn't come with that, so it's obviously not as good. It also has this Mortal Strike condition. But that's how I see Ripper Demon being used, right? The same way that Rev Knight is currently used, it's just not quite as good. And I wanted to use this as a jumping off point to talk about Tormented Demon some more as well. In one of the previous videos, I said that Tormented Demon should just be nerfed so hard that it is basically never seen again. I really hate the card. I don't think it's healthy for the game. The fact that you can, well, you used to be able to Sergeant Slimetoes into it. You can't do that anymore, but you could use Watchtower Guard still. It'd still be reasonable. You're not going to take too much extra damage. I mean, for goodness sake, people are fine with Rolo the Stouting into it. And that's because you get that base attack. It's so sought after. And that 4-2 weapon as well means that you can kill a Jad. And if you're lucky enough to find 2, well, double Jad, that's insane. That's the dream. But if not, just 1 Jad, that's fine. That's insane. That's 2 base attack already, and you still have a 4 attack weapon left over for something like Ogre Warlord or Dagonov Sentinel, right? That second charge facilitates a 2-hit kill on some other creature. Or you can carry the weapon over and hope to draw something, especially if you're going first. But even if you're going second, that still works out a lot of the time. Tormented Demon's really strong, but where it's strong is in the early game when you're trying to reach off your feet. It just cheats the curve so hard. And I said in that video, it's one of the biggest reasons that gold decks are just not very good, because any agenda that wants to build base attack that doesn't have current Tormented Demon in it is just not going to be competitive. It's just not going to be fast enough. It's not going to be able to keep up. It won't have the same opening potential. But where I would miss Tormented Demon, and I would like it to stick around, is for strike decks. I feel like at the moment it's a big part of those decks. It allows you to sort of give you the reach into the next demon, and it gives you a bit of attack behind a strike. And also it does 4 damage as well, so it's kind of like 8 damage in total. And maybe that's too strong as well. Maybe strike decks should have to work a bit harder, or maybe I should rephrase that. Maybe Darkstrike Ariane should have to work a bit harder. But I'd really feel quite bad about Tormented Demon being changed with regards to strike decks. So I do wonder, like, I'd be completely fine if it said, well, you get exhausted and you only get a 4-1 weapon. Like, that would be a great change. I'd be really happy with that. But at the same time, I do wonder if you could keep it as a 4-2 weapon and maybe just make it only say exhaust. So that would be the only thing added to it. It works as normal, except you get exhausted, which I think what that kind of does is it makes you wait a slot before you can start using that weapon, or at least using it optimally. I mean, I guess you could use the weapon in the slot that you're exhausted, but you're not going to be able to kill Jad. You'd still be able to 2-hit kill Dagonov Sentinels and Ogre Warlords. It wouldn't make any difference there. But it would slow down the Jad, which is, I think, a big part of the issue. And also, in doing that, it kind of adds an extra slot that you'll be holding the weapon. So there's more time for your opponent to be able to destroy that weapon. So there is that. I think, I do wonder if Tormented Demon would be okay if it was just exhaust and you got a 4-2 weapon. I still don't know how I'd feel about that, though. I think I just hate the card so much. I just want it to disappear. And I feel like it might still be a bit good, because you'd still have 5 total attack with a 4-2 weapon, right? Like, that's 2-hit kill. I feel like the problem's still half there. I do wonder, though. I do wonder. All reach issues aside, though, Tormented Demon into Ripper Demon is probably a fine combo in a strike deck, not too powerful. Certainly Tormented Demon into Rev Knight is a lot stronger, but that's because Rev Knight is a lot stronger. And maybe that's the issue, right? Maybe Ripper Demon's the fine card and Rev Knight's the strong one. I've said it before, even though I would be personally reluctant to change it. Maybe it does need changing. At any rate, TD, Ripper Demon, fine. But also, Bloodveld Leecher, I think, is worth thinking about. That card just... it seems to outclass the Ripper Demon, and okay, right, Bloodveld Leecher, that's a battle, it's not a strike, which obviously isn't quite as good. But Bloodveld Leecher, like, kind of does more damage than Ripper Demon, because you get to steal some life. And the fact that you're stealing the life also mitigates some of the damage that you're taking as a battle. You get healed up a bit, and also it comes with an armor reward, so that also mitigates some of the damage. So Bloodveld Leecher is really just comparable to a strike on a 6/6 creature that does a bit more damage due to the fact that you're stealing their life. Bloodveld Leecher's really good. So I feel like that just outclasses Ripper Demon. So I feel like Ripper Demon could do with a bit extra. And if I was going to go down that route, maybe Ripper Demon could say something like, strike your next creature. But, you know, the point is it does something extra. It helps you reach into your next creature, which will probably be a demon. And it does that without adding any extra damage behind your strike. Like, it's not like Rev Knight, which gives you 3 temporary attack to strike your rival with. If you're striking your next creature, you're not doing any extra damage to your opponent. It's just helping you out with the net. It just adds a bit more value to the Ripper Demon. At any rate, I didn't need to speak about this for this long, but I did want to use it as a way to talk about Tormented Demon, which I think is important. Necravius. Add 3 copies of your next ally to your hand. Like, just one. Like, no one wants to kill a 6/4. It's a very similar argument to Sapphire Hollow. Now, maybe 3 is a bit too many, but at the same time, it's not like Morwenna, which adds any creature. This only adds allies, so you can't, you know, if it said support, then fine, this would be way too good. You could do some really crazy things with Darox and Sativi and stuff like that. But allies, I feel like allies across the board aren't nearly as good as supports generally. So you could probably add 3 copies. There is some ally synergy in Vanescula as well with Grave Creeper, and I feel like Necravius would enable that Grave Creeper, but I'm really curious as to what Jagex is going to do. On some kind of forum post or Reddit or somewhere, maybe the Steam forums, they mentioned that Gravekeeper was going to be one of the cards that would see some changes. So I'm curious as if they're going to keep the same ally effect, or if they're going to go down a completely different route. I hope they go down a different route, to be honest. And if they do, I hope they make Necravius do something else as well. But for now, I'm going to assume they won't do something different, and in that world where Grave Creeper stays the same as it kind of currently is, I think this is what Necravius should have written on it. I haven't playtested it, though. Maybe 3 is too many. There might be some oversights. There might be some really good allies. For example, we do have Silver Merchant Erin, which is one of the ones I've suggested in a previous video. The video is titled 6 Needed Cards and Neutral Pool Changes Part 1. There is a link to that in the playlist below in the description. But Silver Merchant is an ally, and he adds this to your hand. Extend the length of the game by 1 chapter. So with Necravius, you could get potentially 3, 6, 7, 8 copies of Enchanted Key. So 8 extra chapters? It's a lot. But I'm not even sure if that would necessarily be a problem because, well, it sounds like a lot, but you'd just be trolling at that point because the maximum deck size you could run is 35, and 8 extra chapters isn't going to help you very much. Unless you're running Sapphire Hollow and Calphite Egg Chamber, and adding, you know, just adding extra copies of cards to your hand that are not in your deck, just out of thin air. That is cool. I'd love to see that deck. Then you get all these extra slots of value over your opponent, which makes up for all of the slots that you're actually spending on extending the chapter. Oh, that sounds so cool. Maybe it would be a problem. I haven't playtested it, but the point I'm making is this could just do more. Like, this isn't very good. The easy solution would be to make Silver Merchant Erin not an ally, so you couldn't duplicate him with Necravius, but who knows, they might even change Necravius to something completely different. Myodich Prisoner, a fine card, pretty good card, especially for its stats. Mass Drain, we've had this discussion before. Who are you paying the gold to? It doesn't make sense, this is a vampire bodily function, and it doesn't even need to cost a gold, the effect's not even that strong. In fact, you could even make it cost nothing and give it a buff, which is what I've done. Now, I'd really like to see effects like this be much more prevalent. I think stealing 1 health from everything is really cool. That can propagate some really cool interactions in the game. So I'd like to see that happen more often. Like, you could give this a 2 life reward and then this card would be played more. I don't know. The point is, like, It certainly doesn't need to cost 1, and I think you could just make it better as well. But we've had this discussion before. Same for Malik. When you want to heal, you don't then want to fight a big creature afterwards. If you're low on life and you want to heal, it's because you're about to die, and fighting a Dagannoth Sentinel is not going to help you there. The only insane combo I can think of would be with something like Gluttonous Behemoth, but no one's done it yet. And the reason it would be really strong is because you could Malik to make sure you do not die fighting the Behemoth, and then you heal up to full with the Behemoth and get 3 gold as well, which is nice. But that's not seen, it's not good. This card could do it some love, especially because it'll be used mostly in Dungeoneering. Haunted Leech, a fine card, quite a good card. Harold. When I made this change, New Cerberus hadn't got into the game yet, but now that it has, I think you could just give it the Cerberus treatment, and that is reduce the stats like they did for Cerberus, but also remove 4 attack from all vampires this chapter. I don't know, there's just so many bad vampires. Like, it would certainly make Tenebra a lot better, but Ranis Draken, okay, you're less likely to die fighting it, but that sets your health to 15 when you kill it anyway, so it's not the best interaction with Harold. It's not like you're saving any life overall. The point is, this card's really bad. You could do a whole lot to it, and it would still not be that great. Grave Creeper. You know, I have absolutely no idea how good this would be. I've never seen, in all of Chronicle, an ally deck played. Certainly 15 damage is a lot, but even if they made this viable, I'm not sure how good it would be. My instincts are not that great, because yes, 15 damage is a lot, but you'll be running so many allies in the deck. Will you have enough damage to finish the game? Maybe. I mean, Firewatch is an ally, Doric is an ally, they both deal damage, Deathlotus Assassin's an ally. Alright, you probably could. We'll see. I'll leave that one to Jagex. I genuinely have no idea. Maybe they'll completely change the card to do something entirely different. That might be the safer thing to do. But if they do make it viable, then cool. We get to experiment with a brand new Grave Creeper deck. And I am not going to say no to more content to explore. My suggestion is, though, well, I buffed Necravius, and maybe that will make Grave Creeper viable because of it. Gorge, a fine card. Gataranx. I think a bit on the expensive side. Certainly the rewards are good. 5 life is valuable, and a 3/1 weapon is valuable. But I think the issue is, it's a bit expensive for those because they're not particularly focused. Most of the time, when people play a card, they'll want one effect, which will either be healing or reach. And very rarely will you want them both, and it'll only be, like, truly good when you actually want them both. So I think if you reduce the cost to 2, you make it a lot more comparable to Romley Weaklax. You get a heal, and then instead of 3 extra life, you get a 3/1 weapon, which I think is roughly comparable. A 3/1 weapon's a bit like Giant Spider, and that's, you know, you're getting this instead of 3 life, which is a bit like Cabbage. And Giant Spider and Cabbage are both cards. So I think you can approximate Gataranx at 2 gold to being similar to Romley Weaklax. Slightly better, because Cabbage is 4 life, and you're getting a 3/1 weapon in place of 3 life. But class cards have a license to be better, and it would be nice to see Gataranx seeing some play. Up next, we do have Flying Leech. Perfectly fine card. Not the most amazing card, but we've heard that story all before. Not the most high stats. But if it was neutral, I imagine it would be played just as much as Scorpion is played. Definitely on the same power level there. Not a bad card at all. Fire Shade. No change, except to the Shade Remains. But the text is otherwise the same. I think, though, yes, I did. Yeah, the card is the same as it was before, except the base attack reward has gone up by 1. And this was just to make it a bit more slot efficient, and also a bit more worthy of the effort that you put in, because, you know, you have to kill a 7/6. You also have to have 1 base attack to spend, which isn't the biggest requirement, but when they printed this card, which was back when Vanescula was first released, wow. So that would have been at the very end of the closed beta. I used to think this card back then, so I put it in a deck, and I thought it was going to give me 2 copies of Shade Remains, but I only got 1, and I was like, oh, well, this is no good. But yeah, you have to go through quite a lot of effort. Killing the creature, actually having the base attack to spend, which might not sound like a big deal, but back at the time when it was first released, Grief Linzer was pretty popular, so this was quite dodgy to open with, because yeah, you could count Drain or slash Toxil into it, but if they remove a base attack, well, sucks to be you. You're not going to get the Shade Remains anymore. So that makes me wonder if this could be remove 1 base attack, and then it would have some really interesting synergies with when you are mortal. Sorry, not mortal, when you're exhausted. Anyway, after all that, you then actually have to have 2 gold and another slot to play the Shade Remains in. And if you want to get value out of the 2 temporary attack, you have to have, like, a good creature to kill. I don't know. I just didn't think 2 AP reward was enough, because you have to spend a base attack, and it's over 2 slots. So really, it's a net gain of half a base attack per slot, and you have to kill the 7/6, and you have to spend, and you have to have 2 gold. And you have to wait a chapter, so you can't, like, use the base attack immediately. Whereas, like, if you kill a Jad or anything else that gives you base attack immediately, you can use it that same chapter to curve upwards. And the same argument applies to the spend, right? If you lose that base attack, you then don't have it for the rest of that chapter. And obviously you could mitigate that issue by playing it at the end of the chapter, but sometimes, like, you might not be able to do that. And, like, at any rate, it's just awkward. Yeah. Feral Vampire. A perfectly fine card. It's not the best card, but that's, well, it's not even a Sapphire. Get this for free, so that's alright. But I really like it, because Jad's got 7 health, this has 8, Sentinel has 9, and Ogre Warlord has 10. So there are some decks that just, the curve is beautiful. It's really beautiful. You can just curve up the whole chapter. I like it. It's kind of like Dagon Sentinel, but slightly easier to kill, slightly less punishing. But once you curve up, once you have lots of base attack, it doesn't have the same late game utility, especially when Sentinel used to heal 5. You could, like, count Draenor into it. I guess you would Cerberus into it now, and then you'd get the health off the Cerberus, and then you'd also get the health off the Sentinel. This doesn't do that, so it doesn't have as much sort of late game utility, but a fine card. Dreadnought. So I wanted to keep it as similar as possible to the card that it currently was. I didn't want to change the vision of the game too much, that phrase I keep repeating. But if I were Jagex, I probably would come up with something totally different. I don't know what the Dreadnought is in RuneScape, but I would add more vampire synergies. If we're going to keep it the same as it currently is, though, I think what it needed was just, like, a reason to be played in the early game. Or at least a bit more of a reward, like a bit more of an incentive to put it in your deck. The only, well, you'd never really run this. I mean, it did see some play, but that's because Miracle Ariane was very popular. And that deck is obviously predicated on effectively 4 very strong spells: Double Earth Blast, Double Earth Wave. And if you can discard a couple of those, or even one of them before the game starts, that's alright. And you can lure the opponent into this, so it has utility there as well. But I think overall, you're not going to put it in every deck, obviously, because there are some decks that run no spells. Raptor. Well, I guess Raptor does have a couple of spells, like Anticipation, but they're not exactly, game-defining, right? Get rid of his Anticipation isn't going to make or break the game in the same way that getting rid of Earth Blast would. So, I gave it the effect of Krasian Warrior as well, so you can use this to lure the opponent into, get your base attack up, and it's also card draw, setting up for the late game. Again, though, I would give it a totally different effect, but if we're going to keep it the same, that's what I think it needs. Culling the Weak. Again, who are you paying this gold to? It's a vampire. Well, I guess vampires like to go out and cull the weak on a Sunday morning. I can see this being something that vampires do, and I don't see why it should cost anything. And I've also, like, given it some real synergy, like some actual vampire synergy that I think Vanescula desperately needs. So, whilst this effect is associated with 4 attack creatures, I dropped it down to 3, so the number of creatures it works on is less, and that's, like, in line with it costing 0. And I think for a 3 attack creature, destroying it is pretty much the same as removing its health by 4. Obviously, destroy it is strictly better, and I don't know, why does it have to be remove health by 4? Why can't we just, like, stop dancing around like, oh, it might be a bit... It's not going to be too strong. It's going to be fine. And what it also does is open up some really cool synergies with stuff like Bunyip and Harold. You reduce the attack of Ogre Chieftain with Bunyip, and then you walk up to him with Culling the Weak and smash him to pieces. Like, that's so cool. And also with Harold, that reduces the attack of stuff by 4, and that would work on Tenebra. Like, that's actually really cool synergy. It would work on Ranis Drakian, Feral Vampire. Like, there's your vampire deck. That's cool, right? And in Dungeoneering as well, this is just more useful reach that doesn't cost an obscene amount. Next up, Crypt. The cost I left the same on this one, but what I did change was this clause here, remove weapon. I deleted that from the card. Back when Crypt was printed, that was in the era of what I think is now called Old Kale. So Kale used to give you a 4-2 weapon. Yeah, it was a 2-2 creature that gave a 4-2 weapon. And obviously Sergeant Slimetoes existed as well. So there was a number of ways to get like a reasonably sized weapon to combo with Crypt. But now that's not the case. Both Kale and Sergeant Slimetoes have kind of gone. So the largest weapon you're going to have is like a Watchtower guard weapon, at least that you sort of normally kind of consistently have in Vanescula now, at least current meta Vanescula. So I think remove weapon isn't really needed anymore, and like Crypt's never been that good because unlike Romley, which heals like a static 7 no matter when you pay for it, this obviously heals more the later the game goes, the more base attack you can build, so it's not as reliable, it's not as consistent, and certainly in the early game 1 gold for, I don't know, like a 3 or 4 heal is quite bad. So it's not a great heal for like healing purposes, but you can combo with it, right? Like you can, like I want to compare it to Snapshot, which obviously if you have a high total attack because you're holding your weapon, it does lots of damage. I'd like Crypt to be like that. It's not always good for like, I need health, I'm going to die, I'm going to use Crypt right now to heal. It's not good for that, like Romley's better. But it's, if you can set it up, it gives you a lot more value, and that's what I'd like it to be. And I think remove the clause, remove weapon would certainly help it. I mean, it is a ruby, I think it needs to be better than it is currently. Bergerot Citizen, the strictly better Black Arm Bandit. So, pretty good card. Steal up to 1 health from rival, it's a 2 life swing, which is almost as good as Scorpion. Like, it's not because, well, as a heal it's 1 life, which is nothing, and as damage it's 1 damage, which is nothing. And Scorpion is like a very focused 3 damage, so this is not as comparable, but it's still like a 2 life swing overall, so I guess if you really want to call it that, then it is. But it's clearly better than Black Arm Bandit and Scorpion. But kind of what happened when Vile Watch was nerfed, some of the reaction to that was, oh, alright, Vile Watch isn't as good, I'll just take it out the deck. We'll replace the Vile Watches with Scorpions, which weren't currently in the deck. And, oh, now I don't need this gold. I'll take Bergerot Citizen out and put in something else, like Zombie Pirate or Flying Leech. Something that's a bit more focused on the damage, right? That was some of the reaction, which tells me that Bergerot Citizen is, like, whilst it's a good card, it's not, like, insane. Because originally I wanted to take some of the gold off of it, but I was speaking to some other people and they said, nah, don't do that. And they explained what they thought, and I kind of agreed with them, so there's my story about Bergerot. It's a fine card. Bloodveld Leecher, we spoke about that earlier when we spoke about Ripper Demon. Blood Tithe. Now, another bodily, well, not a bodily function, but certainly a glass of blood in a wine cup, right? Posh. Vanescula's a vampire princess. It's a tithe. And this one sat a lot better with me costing 2 gold than all of the others, but I do wonder if it could cost 0. Now, I do not want to change the text at all, because this is very cool. This is such a cool Vanescula card. But I do wonder, let's just say it costs 0 for the sake of argument. I can see people being very greedy with it. They're playing against an aggro deck, and they're like, alright, I need to heal in slot 3 because they're going to probably deal about 8 damage to me. Something like Scorpion, Troll Chucker, well, that's 7 damage. But that you can kind of predict how much damage you're going to take, so I'm going to put Blood Tithe in slot 3 to heal up. But actually, I'm going to be a bit greedy. I'm going to push for a bit more value. I'm going to move it up to slot 4. So let's say you're on like 15 lives, something like that. They do 8 damage to you over the two slots. So 15 subtract 4 is 11, then 11 subtract 4 is 7, and then you're going to Blood Tithe back up to 15, but you're like, I'm going to move it up a slot, right? I'm going to take another 4 damage from them. I'm going to go down to 3 life, and then get some, like, ultra value. And then, like, in your mind, you've planned this all out, but in reality, out comes something you don't expect. They face Tank Ogre Chieftain, or I don't know what it is, right? But I can see people being super greedy and then just dying. So I do wonder how good a 0-cost Blood Tithe would be. I think it's interesting to think about. I don't necessarily think it would be that amazing, but certainly 0 gold, 14 life heal is amazing. And on average, I can see it healing around 9 or 10, which is probably too good for a 0-cost card, but it does come with that risk factor. So the next question is, could it cost 1? And I think that would be alright. Should it cost 2? Like, maybe, but I really want to see the effect be played more. I think it's really quite cool, but I left it at 2. I was being conservative, but I think it potentially could cost 1, maybe even 0, but that's the kind of thing you need to do playtesting for. Wired, or weird, or I don't know, but I haven't changed it, and I should have done. So my idea was to give it, well, 2 health as opposed to 3, make it easier to kill. Because, like, let's just compare this to Kale. Now, maybe that's not the fairest comparison, because Kale is a diamond card, this is a sapphire. But this is awful, right? You can't open with it because it has 3 health, so you're going to take 7 damage. You're not going to get 3 armor, like Kale would give you, and you're going to help your opponent out by removing 4 health. Now, they're not going to know it's going to happen, but they're likely to save some kind of life as a result of it. And then the effect that you get is only marginally better than the one Kale gives you. And I say only marginally because remove 2 health from your next 2 creatures is pretty much the same as all of your creatures, because if you play Kale in slot 1, it's going to hit slots 2 and 3, and the only slot you're not going to hit is slot 4. So weird is, like, well, the only extra value you're going to get is that final creature, 1 extra slot. And even then, it's like, you're unlikely to get value out of all 3, because often when you play Kale, you'll remove 2 health from the next creature, and that'll be the only creature that matters. The one afterwards, it won't matter. Or maybe the first one won't matter, but the one afterwards will. It's just one creature where it really helps, and the rest, it doesn't matter. And I can see Weird being exactly the same. So basically what I'm saying is, if you made this a 7-2, it would still be not as good as Kale, because the effects are basically the same. Kale comes with 3 armor, and it's a lot less risky with regards to something like Archmage Cedrador, and Kale doesn't help your opponent out. At least it would be more playable, though. I don't think I've ever seen one of these played in all of the time that I've played Chronicle. But if it was a 7-2, it's a bit like Dagon Fledgling. It's kind of some useful reach, which will be valuable in Dungeoneering and other draft formats. The final thing to think about, though, is maybe its effect should just be changed entirely. I don't know what a Weird is in RuneScape, but maybe it's worthy of much higher stats than 7-3, I'm not sure. And then you could make it like a pretty big vampire, kind of like Tenebra, or just some other vampire, I don't know, it can be like Feral Vampire. And then you just, like, change the text entirely to something else. Because I think Vanescula is really lacking in vampire synergy. And I think this is an opportunity to print, like, a good vampire. Because she doesn't really need more effects like this. Like, if she wanted this effect, at the top level, you'd just run Kale. And a whole bunch of Vanescula's cards are reach anyway. Like, Bloodsteel and Sap Life Force. Like, she doesn't need more crappy reach. Ranis Draken, the final Vanescula card. This is actually very powerful in my opinion, but I've yet to find a meta where it's appropriate to run. What this is a Dagon Sentinel on steroids. It's got less attack, slightly, so it's easier to kill, but instead of a 2 life reward, you get a 12 armor reward. I even thought this was pretty good when old Dagon Sentinel was still alive, but now that old Dagon Sentinel is gone, this is even better than it was. Now the idea is, let's say you're at 20 life, and then you 2-hit kill Ranis Draken, so you drop down to 13 life because you take a hit off Ranis. You then set your max health to 15, so it's actually a net gain of 2 life in that particular circumstance, and then you get 12 armor as well. That's a 14 life heal that you get after killing the card, and the base attack as well. The idea is to kill it when your health will basically be 15 or less anyway, so it won't matter that your health is being set to 15. Now, obviously, if your health is being set to 15, you're not going to be able to heal back up afterwards because it's max health, so going to the final fight won't be quite so good. But that's alright, because the deck you'd put this in is a strike deck. You want to build your base attack up so that you can start striking them, and in the mirror match or against an aggro deck, you're not going to go to the final fight anyway. So Ranis really is just a lot of extra value in a single slot. It's like a much, much better Sentinel. It's also interesting, and I think this is what Jagex were hoping for, it makes all of your mortal effects, like always, for the rest of the game, they can now work all of the time. I think ideally they'd like it to say, your mortal effects now always trigger, irrespective of whether you're mortal or not. So I think the best approximation they could get to that was set your max health to 15. At least this is the feeling I got from what a bunch of the mods said. The problem with that, though, and it's shown in the Trials of Radimus, is that after you kill Ranis Draken, your max health is 15. Stuff like Firewatch and Gorge don't work. So there's that. I mean, Fuldarok will work, Satifia will work, but a few of the really good ones won't work, and that's a shame. But Satifia and Darroks are pretty good cards, so that is a plus for the deck that you'd put this in. You'd probably want to run them as well, though not necessarily. You might need the slots for the strike agenda. But that's alright, because Ranis Draken is a Sentinel on steroids anyway, it's pretty good. But that does conclude the Vanescula video, the longest one of all by the looks of it. In total, if we go to Properties, Details, 3 hours and a half of recording. Which obviously isn't all in the video, but what tends to happen a lot of the time is I'll record something and then just royally mess up my words and then re-record it. Or I'll record something and not like how I explained it and try again. And then in all of the successful attempts, there'll be a lot of downtime between my thoughts as well. What I do is like say a thing and then maybe wait 15 seconds whilst I'm thinking, and there'll be just total silence, and then I'll say something else. So actually, if you were to watch these, they would sound very disjointed. And then in editing, I cut out all the downtime and make it sound like I'm speaking continuously, which I'm not. But yeah, the only reason I'm including this is because I think the only people who got this far will be the ones who are interested in knowing how I make these. These do take quite a while. So do leave a like if you thought it was interesting. I really do appreciate that. And I will see you all again next time.